I suppose this, flows very nicely onto the next topic, doesn't it? In terms of the October the 7th anniversary, because just to tack on to what you were saying there, Jake, I think that was something which that moment more than any other exposed that fundamental rot within all of our own societies. And as we mark it this week, it is worth remembering just how apocalyptic in scale that pogrom was in southern Israel. More than 1,000 civilians just butchered, the rape of women, the mutilation of women, the taking of the hostages, the fact that all of this was live streamed around the world, and what was presented to us was such a simple sort of moral test, which is, are you going to side with this liberal democracy that is under assault by jihadist lunatics? Are you going to side with the world's only, Jewish state as it sees all of its worst nightmares realized, as a attack on a barbaric and enormous scale is inflicted upon it for no other reason than the people who are being targeted are Israeli and Jewish? And the fact that so many people at best stuttered and at worst kind of said the pogromists have a point will haunt us for some time to come. I think that whilst, as we've been talking about, the war coming to an end is something to welcome, our kind of internal convulsions over these questions is going to continue. Anti-Israel sentiment has become the kind of glue for much of the left these days. This new alliance that we see being consummated, which is building for many decades now, essentially between kind of Islamist politics and supposed anti-imperialist left-wing politics. I mean, that is literally one party now. That is literally one clear-cut alliance that exists in our politics. So whilst the horror of the pogrom, the disgustingness of the reaction, we can be thankful that the war is coming to a close. But even within our own societies, we're going to have there's a lot of work to do to kind of pare back what has been said, what has been done, and the kind of extent to which, whilst a lot of these prejudices against Israel and prejudices against the West have been building for a very long time, for a certain proportion of the population, that's now they feel like they've been proven right. They feel like they've been justified, and so that's going to take a lot of time to unravel, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would only add that those leftists who are aligning with the Islamists now and supporting their efforts to enforce their authority over Britain, which is what they're trying to do, I can only hope they don't learn what happens when such an effort is successful. Because if you cast your eyes back to the Iranian Revolution, for example, 1979, that's exactly what happened. The leftists joined with the Islamists against the Shah, against the corrupt imperial power, a corrupt monarchy. And when he was toppled and the revolution took place, the first thing the Islamists did was stamp out and obliterate the leftists who had supported them and enforce a Sharia law in which anybody who was secular was imprisoned, tortured and killed. And I just hope that they don't find out the hard way what happens when you support Islamists.
Definitely. And it's worth going back. Tom, you were talking about the reaction to the anniversary. I think it seems to have been forgotten or perhaps even buried that the pro-Palestine protests, the hate marches, as they're often called, those really began in the wake of October the 7th. They did not start with Israel's invasion of Gaza. This was something that was a celebration of an attack on Israel. It was clearly not a humanitarian.
No, and like the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, this was reported in the Jewish Chronicle a while ago. They made their first application for a national demonstration on October the 7th itself, about midday. The bodies were still warm at that point. I mean, the moral horror of that is something.
The fighting was still happening.
The fighting was still happening, indeed. It was still
around the Nova Festival attack time.
It was still ongoing, and also, as we now know from the Community Security Trust report that came out last year, into the immediate aftermath, the kind of carnival of anti-Semitism, which included, almost 100% rise in anti-Semitic assaults. We're not just talking about, as horrific as it is, destruction of property or graffiti or horrendous things said on social media. Assaults were up by 100%. This peaked before the ground invasion proper began, and described it very well as a carnival of celebration of October the 7th. People are kind of trying to forget this now or downplay this, to pretend that those things that they tweeted or said in the wake of this horrific assault were just by the wayside, and we can't let them do so, because it's something which really made absolutely clear that there is a kind of moral rot, particularly in the left, but not exclusively. And I think one thing that I've found particularly chilling is that, and I'm sure we've discussed this before on this podcast, but I think we all knew after October the 7th how the Palestine Solidarity Campaign were going to react. I think we all knew how Jeremy Corbyn was going to react. I think we all knew how the Socialist Workers' Party were going to react. I mean, they put out a headline immediately after October the 7th saying, "Rejoice."
Yeah.
So we've had their number for a very long time. I think what has been more concerning is that kind of middle of the road, sort of mid-wit centrist opinion, if we can even call it that. The sort of people who I think even 10 years ago would have tried to look both ways or just gesture to how complicated it is or say, I'm not sure, I haven't done enough research or whatever it is, sided pretty heavily with the wrong side here. I'm thinking of the James O'Briens, I'm thinking of the Gary Linekers. These are absurd characters in our discourse, but nevertheless, I think they are a kind of indication of the fact that even though this was building for a very long time, if you think about the kind of anti-Israel prejudice that was being pumped out by the BBC or the New York Times or all these more kind of supposedly centrist outlets, it's really kind of come to fruition now in response to this war. And the fact that happened after October the 7th, the thing that proved the necessity of Israel defending itself, the thing that proved that these jihadists are a menace not just to Jewish life but to humanity itself. The fact that they have this realization, the penny drops for them that actually Israel is the problem after that, I think is very revealing about how deep that rot runs, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it feels to me there's something going on here, and I think it's got to do with those psychological experiments where you enter a room and you expect it to be one way, even if it isn't that way, you still think that it is the way you expect it because you're so heavily invested in expecting something to be a certain way, and there's a sort of deadening of the imagination. I think we live in what Simon Sebag Montefiore calls the comfort democracies. We live in an age of comfort. Alexandre Kojève called it the eternal Sunday. We live in a state of the eternal Sunday, and it feels like for those people looking at what Hamas did on October the 7th, they see with their own eyes because Hamas recorded it.
Yeah,
they see beheadings and the murder of children and the people who murdered them then taking a drink out of their fridge. You see abductions, the rapes we didn't see because we were protected from those images, but we heard about them. We saw all this, and yet people can see it, and still they can see the kind of savagery of unvarnished jihadist fanaticism, and they can come away and still think, yeah, but Israel.
Yeah,
and I think that in a similar way, we can see hordes of people taking to the streets on October the 7th in Britain, on marches, and just afterwards, on marches organised by people who have strong links to Hamas. Again, the Jewish Chronicle revealed that. Many of the key organisers of the protests have been pictured with Hamas leaders in Gaza in the past.
Yeah.
People chanting slogans that were initially openly pro-Hamas, but then were thinly masked. People can see that happening. They can see that it hasn't actually got to do with anything real. No compassion for Palestinians. They know that and can see it, and yet don't really internalize it. Oh no, these are just decent people who just don't want children to be killed. You can see that no genocide is taking place, but you think, oh, there must be a genocide. You can see that there's no famine. All the pictures coming out of Gaza showing starving children have been shown to be of kids with health problems. You can go on Snapchat maps and you can Snapchat heat maps, see what people are posting in Gaza. You can see there's loads of food and no one's starving. You can see that, but people still believe the propaganda because the imagination has been deadened in terms of understanding the extremities of suffering and the extremities of culture, because we've never been exposed to it ourselves in our eternal Sunday life. And I think that felt all the more painful after the Manchester attacks, where the Jewish community just felt, we've been telling you for 2 years that they want to kill us. We've been begging you to take it seriously, to stop these marches, to stop this incitement, to stand up against the incitement from the UN, from the BBC, for the government to take a lead. And what have you done? You recognise Palestine, putting the stamp of approval on the idea that actually it's not Hamas that's the problem, it's Israel. They need to be pressurised. And on October the 7th itself, even after the Manchester attacks, Keir Starmer didn't appear. He didn't make a speech. There was in Berlin, the Brandenburg Gate was lit up with Israeli colours. That didn't happen in Britain. Keir Starmer fucked off to India and danced with some Indians to sort of try and secure a trade deal. That was his way of marking October the 7th. It was just, it couldn't be clearer how much disdain these people hold for the Jewish community and for Israel, and for everyone else. They just can't even see what the reality is, and it's coming for everyone. That's the irony of it.